Fort Mojave, the fort that wasn't supposed to be, the fort that began because of tragedy and ended with tragedy.
Good morning. Today we're at Fort Mojave, and behind me stands the pillars of the water tower that stored water for the soldiers that occupied this fort. This fort wasn't supposed to be here. Congress didn't want this fort to be here, but because of the relationships between the Mojave Indian tribes and the pioneers passing through this area, crossing at Bill's Landing, this fort became necessary to some. It all began when $50,000 was allocated to a military officer named Beale, who also was the one famous for providing camels or trying to use camels in this area in the military. He made the road through here, and instead of going down where the normal people would cross in the old days, like the Oatmans had planned on crossing down at Yuma and Fort Yuma area, he crossed here in this area right here, which is known as Bill's Landing, and they would cross here. So he made this fort, and about a year later a party came through here from Iowa, and they were called the Rose Bailey Party, Pioneer Party, and they had gone down to this point. And when the Mojave Indians first seen them, because they had traveled 1,200 miles from Iowa to get to this point, they were pretty exhausted. They had traveled across a pretty barren area of the desert where there wasn't a lot of water, and they staggered down in here. And initially the Mojave tribe was pretty friendly to them, even helping them to get down the hill here off this bluff down to what is called Bill's Landing or Bill's Crossing. So as I was saying, the Rose Bailey Party from Iowa, the pioneers, had traveled 1,200 miles to get to this point. And it was refreshing to see water here. But they did have to cross the Colorado River, which was much larger in those days than it is today, now that we have dams all over the place, slowing down the flow. The Mojave tribe was initially pretty friendly to them, and we'll get into the characters of the Mojave tribe here in a little bit. And they even helped them get down this hill here, which, see if you can see, down towards the river. And they set up camp down there, the pioneers did. But a problem ensued as the pioneers were beginning to cut down cottonwood trees so they could build rafts, so they could float their wagons across the river. When Bill made this crossing, he swam his camels and his horses over, and he made rafts to float their cargo over. But the Indians, the Mojave tribe, took exception to this, and a conflict began to ensue. Now this conflict that began to arise between the Rose Bailey Party, Pioneer Party, and the Mojave tribe in 1857 was not the first. Prior to that, explorers and mountain men who had came across here, including Kit Carson and different explorers, had come here, and one party was actually, Jedediah Smith was actually attacked. His party was attacked. They spent the night in the Mojave tribe, and as they began to cross the river to go on into California area, the Mojave Indians attacked them while they were in the river and killed everyone in his party except him and one other person. Kit Carson wasn't in that party at the time, but that was the first written conflict between the Mojave tribe and the Americans passing through here. So they were all Americans, so you know, that they were all born here, just like the Mojave tribe was. And it's not a matter of race, that we're talking about an issue of cultures. Now, when them explorers were attacked by the Mojave Indians as they crossed the river, the reason turned out to be that previously, before they had arrived, another party of explorers, American explorers or trappers, had come and had treated them, the Mojave tribe, very disrespectfully, very bad. And so in retaliation, the next group of travelers that came through, they attacked. Now, for the most part, the Mojave tribe is a pretty peaceful tribe. They did have slaves. Olive Oatman, who they purchased from another tribe, was a slave among them. She claims to be a slave among them, but they think that she was part of the tribe. I guess depending on which story you think. There were 6 major tribes of the Mojave, and they were a lot of them. They had a very healthy tribe. They were agricultural. They did hunt, but they also planted and was very industrious, a very industrious people. And however, there was an encroachment happening, and when they started cutting down those trees, the Native American Mojave tribe went across the river, upriver, and then went and crossed here with their bows and arrows in the air above their heads as they crossed the river right here at Bill's Landing and Bill's Crossing. The pioneer men saw this happening, and but didn't take too much, wasn't too concerned about it because they had had peaceful relationships with them up to this point. And so when they got closer, the attack began, and they ended up killing 8 people. I believe there was only 1 Mojave killed. They ended up killing 8 pioneers. The newspaper reports say that it was mostly women and children. Other reports say it was 8 men who were on the outside of the wagon train's safety net. Either way, this conflict ensued, and the pioneers, distressed, loaded what they could in the wagons they could and left, leaving a bunch of wagons here, which the Mojaves ended up burning. And they headed back all the way back to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where they reported what happened. Beale, who earlier had said that they need to have a fort here because the Mojave tribe is a very powerful and large tribe, which the Congress ignored because they're like, oh, we don't want to spend the money to do that. Now was put in a position because the newspapers reported this attack and, you know, reporting that women and children were killed. Of course, the society was going to be in an uproar, and so Congress was forced then to bring in troops. They brought some troops, sent some troops over here from Los Angeles. However, there used to be a lake called Beaver Lake farther up here. It no longer exists since the dams were there. And the Mojave Indians saw them and attacked them. They were so numerous that the soldiers decided that they probably weren't going to survive here, so they headed back to, even though they fought them off, they headed back to Los Angeles, which in turn brought this major colonel, or this major named Hoffman. Him and 600 troops came here to establish what we now know as Fort Mojave. The conflicts, though, were not over. And in this war, unlike other wars, this war ended up having no winners. No one won. There was damage done to both sides, but in this war, there were no winners. And I'll explain that later. Hoffman came here and met with the Mojave tribe with his 600 warriors, his 600 military soldiers, and said, look, if you want to have peace, you come and meet us at, and they met them at Bill's Landing where the wagon train was attacked. This is Bill's Crossing. This is where the Battle of Bill's Crossing took place. This is where the pioneers had come down from the plateaus with the help of the Mojaves and camped here. And then to make rafts, they began to cut down trees because they needed the wood to make rafts. That upset the Mojave, and the Mojave went across the river downstream and then came across the river here well, coming to the pioneers' camp. And the pioneers, some of the pioneers saw him, but they did not think too much of it because they had been friendly before, and the attack began. This is a place where Bill had brought his camels, his horses, and created the road that he was commissioned to build with $50,000 to go from Fort Smith, Arkansas to the city of Los Angeles. This is the route he chose instead of going to Fort Yuma. Come and meet us at, and they met them at Bill's Landing where the wagon train was attacked. Not the greatest choice if you're looking for peace, but I think Hoffman was trying to make a point. He asked for 9 hostages before he would even consider having peace with the Mojave. He wanted the chief who was responsible for the attack on his soldiers at Beaver Lake. He wanted 2 of the warriors who were involved in the attack on the Pioneer wagon train. And he wanted 6 other hostages held in Fort Yuma as a sign of good faith by the Mojave tribe that they truly did want peace. The attack on the wagon train became known as the Battle of Bill's Crossing. That's spelled B-E-A-L-E-S, Bill's Crossing, and was published, like I said, nationwide. The military then was called upon to come here and protect the pioneers who were crossing on this road that they used $50,000 to buy. It was important to the citizens that the government protects them. And obviously, for obvious reasons, the Mojave tribes were taking exception to this many people passing through the land. Initially, it wasn't a big deal because people were passing through the land and not staying. However, when the pioneers began to cut down the trees to make rafts, that changed the relationship. After Colonel Hoffman had made this deal and the Mojave tribe's chiefs had delivered the hostages, that's probably the best way to describe them, hostages, well, as it turns out, those hostages never made it to Yuma. Or if they did, 6 of them escaped and came back, and 2 were killed trying to escape. In the meantime, Colonel Hoffman was having this fort built that we're standing on right now. And as you look, you can see some steps here, foundations around were buildings. Today there's nothing here but foundations, bolts sticking out, and then places in the ground where cables were attached to the water tank. And we'll walk around and see what we can see in a little bit. As the story continues, Colonel Hoffman left and a different person was put in charge, and his name was Major Lewis Armstead. Now, he was a commander of the fort now, and what he had different than Hoffman was he wasn't very patient. So all this raiding that was going on, the Mojave tribe was doing with settlers in the area, other villages and pioneers, it didn't set well with him. And so he began sending out raiding parties of his own to the military, and as reprisals for what the Mojave tribe was doing to other people. And about south of here, somewhere, the exact location is not known, south of here, some of the soldiers on a raiding party against the Mojave tribe saw some of them out there and ended up killing one of the 3. 2 got away, and then very shortly afterwards, all these Mojave Indians came to seek revenge on the death of theirs, which is, understandable, on their warrior who had been killed. But because, like the pioneers, the military had guns, and they were able to hold them off until reinforcements arrived. Now, what changed at this point as compared to what was in the past was that this major had no patience. he sent reinforcements over there, but the Mojave tribe, they sent reinforcements too and came back again to try and get revenge. And yet, because of all the soldiers who had firearms, and because of this particular Colonel Mackenzie not having any patience, he ordered his troops to charge into the midst of the Mojaves, and they annihilated them, wiping out those warriors who came to fight. And when shortly after that, the Mojave Indian chiefs, the tribal chiefs, sent a messenger saying, hey, we want to have peace again. This time, this peace would be the beginning of the end of the Mojave culture. What you see here, this fort, I can't say it was abandoned, but during the Civil War, all the federal soldiers were sent away from here to fight in the Civil War. But shortly after the Civil War, they returned because of issues between the pioneer settlers and the Mojave Indians. And then shortly at the turn of the century, in the 1890s, it was deemed that this fort was no longer necessary. So the military turned it over to the Department of Indian Affairs, who made it into a school, and unfortunately began that dissimulation of trying to Americanize the children of the Mojave Indians. Now, I understand the fort being here to protect pioneers, but that is one of the dark spots in American history when we thought we knew best about how to handle the Native American Indians in the United States. And unfortunately, we did a lot of damage to tribes, some who completely lost their language. But what's significant here is a military fort in this area and a place that the soldiers called hell, and one traveler passed through and said, it's hot at Fort Yuma and it's hot in hell, but it's quite possibly more hot here than in either of those other two places. Now, this school lasted probably all the way to the 30s, I believe, and this fort and the buildings, well, by World War II, they were pretty much gone. They were all made of wood, and you'll look at the pictures, and I'll post these pictures up there so you can see them as we go through this. Pretty much made of wood, and they were either taken apart, fallen down, used for fuel for fires, or to build other buildings. The Colorado River, the mighty Colorado River that's over here at this point, was what it was all about. The Mojave tribe was so identified with this location in the river that they actually called themselves, if you translate it into English, the people by the river. And rightly so, because this was their home for a long, long time. And today they are still here, as the reservation that they occupy now is in this area as well. Them, the Chumuhueva, and a few Navajo, and maybe even possibly a couple Hopi. I'm not sure about that. But what is the significance of this clash of cultures? Because that's what it was. It wasn't racism. It was a clash of cultures. And the significance was, so what was the significance of this fort? Well, it protected the pioneers and settlers and kept a balance between the native tribes and the pioneers who were passing through to go on to California. Did it have a negative impact on the Mojave tribe? Of course, it certainly did. And when it became a school, even more so. However, when you see what was going on in the country at that time, you could see how the Industrial Revolution that was headed this way, with all the technology, the firepower, and all the soon-to-come railroad, would change the entire landscape of the cultures that previously existed. It was inevitable. Progress was not going to stop. The 600 soldiers that were here at this garrison or fort, it was actually called a fort, Fort Mojave. Initially it was called Fort Colorado, but it quickly was changed to Fort Mojave. And I think, why not? I mean, it gives some honor to the occupants who occupied this land. But it's interesting, the men who had to live here and the officers' wives who had to live here. It would just be, without air conditioning, it would be hot. And it can get cold here too. There used to be a stream at one of these coulees that would go down towards the river and bring fresh water as well as river water. Today a lot of it is agriculture, and this site is protected, which it should be, because it's a part of our history. It is a sign of a battle that no one won. In the end, the military abandoned the fort, and in the end, the Mojave tribe was impacted and lost a lot of their heritage. I don't believe that this battle of the Mojave tribe had a winner in it. Certainly, they were annihilated by the 600 soldiers with rifles, but in the end, what do you see here? You see foundations, which is probably poetic justice for the schools of assimilation that existed here after it was turned over to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. If you like this content, hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of these things. There's a bell on there you can hit that will notify you when the next video is made. So, and thank you for watching. So what we have here is porcelain. Looks like it came from a toilet. And more porcelain around. Fort Mojave.